If you will, go ahead and go back in your mind to the year 1862. Not as far a trip for all of us, but let's go back in our minds to the year 1862. This is a time of uncertainty for America. Everyone's mind is fixated on this war that is very quickly approaching our doorsteps, the Great Civil War of the United States. Abraham Lincoln is trying to restore peace, but it'll be 3 years until we see the end of this war. But it is a beautiful spring morning, not terribly unlike the one that we had today. And a man by the name of Joseph Henry Gilmore is walking to church, because that's what you did in 1862. You didn't jump in your car and drive, you walked. Or maybe you had a horse and buggy. But you had plenty of time to consider things as you went along the way. And Joseph Henry Gilmore is doing just that. He's thinking about this buzz that's in the air as he heads to church to preach a lesson that he intends to preach on Psalm 23. If you want to open your Bibles there, we're going to read that passage in just a minute. But that day, he realizes, is not unlike the rest, because everyone's mind is focused on how there is great uncertainty about what tomorrow may bring. There is great civil unrest. Lincoln, as a leader of this nation, is being called into question. Is he really the man to do something about what we're facing? Whatever it was, Joseph stands in the pulpit and he reads this passage, and these words struck him like they hadn't struck him before. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the back of his mind, as he was reading these words, he couldn't help but think just how comforting these were to a nation in such conditions of uncertainty, of turmoil, of chaos. And he thought, no matter what the president decides, no matter which path the nation takes, He leadeth me. Later on, he is writing about this moment in an account of his life. He's journaling about things that are happened. And Gilmore recalls that moment, that day as he read those verses. He says, I realized it made no difference how we are led or whether we are led, so long as we are sure God is leading us. And he recalled after services, several members came to him, and they were talking about the sermon, and they were talking about the Civil War, the distress of the nation. And Gilmore sat down, and taking out a pencil, he began to write down words that he had preached that day, and words that he would later turn into a poem. And he would go home, and he would give that poem to his wife. And following that, as any good man does, he completely forgot all about it and went about his day. But his wife didn't. His wife sent it off to a publication then known as the Watchman and Reflector magazine. And a man reading that by the name of William Bradbury found it, published it in the songbook, The Golden Censer of Hymns. And then in 1865, just 3 years later, Gilmore is on his way to Philadelphia to again preach, trying to accept a position in Rochester, New York. And he sits down at the church and he begins scanning the hymnal, looking for a song that will go with the sermon he's about to preach. And for the first time in his life, he realizes what his wife has done when he stumbles upon the song, He Leadeth Me. That's how he discovered what his wife had done 3 years prior. This song, He Leadeth Me, is a fantastic song. Over 150 years later, we still sing. We still sing, and it's a song that is sung by a country that's still in turmoil, that still deals with chaos and uncertainty. And it's a song that still emphasizes a very important and necessary thing for us to recognize. Who really is leading us? The last time I preached this is the point I said, take out your songbooks. I just think it's cool how much we've changed in just a couple of years that I'm not going to really have to say that anymore. But if you do, if you want to take your songbooks out and follow along, we're going to look at the words of this song as we consider its meaning. If you don't want to do that, I am going to put them on the board for you to read together. I want to just read the first verse together, and we are going to just make some notes that we see as we sing this song to our God. So verse 1 says, He leadeth me, O blessed thought, O words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. That very first verse teaches us we need the leadership of God in our lives. That's what Gilmore was trying to get across in that sermon on that day. We need the leadership of God in our lives. This is kind of the opposite end of the year to be saying this, but have you ever paid attention to the geese when it gets cold? You ever paid attention to what migratory birds have this ability to do? To recognize that the temperatures are changing, the ecosystem that I live in is not conducive to my way of life. Because I either eat things that are on the surface that are going to die out or go into hibernation during this cold weather, or I eat things that are under the surface of the water, which is going to freeze over and I won't be able to get to them. Either way, this isn't good for my way of life. So what do? I head south. Birds are the only animals, short of some of our elderly, that have the ability to notice it's time to go south. Man does not have this inner guidance system built into us to say this is the way that we should go. We don't have that. And in fact, Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23 tells us it is not in man to direct his own steps. That's the problem that we see at the very beginning of the Bible. When God directs our steps and says, I have given you everything to eat in this garden. I have given you work to do in this garden. And yet one thing I tell you, do not eat of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. And what has man done? They have said, I want to be the judge that says, I'll decide whether something is good or bad. I'll direct my step. And ever since then, we have proven we're not good at that. We're not able to direct our steps in a way that leans towards things that are good and wholesome and righteous. We need guidance. And the imagery of Psalm chapter 23 reminds us of that. Because Psalm 23 doesn't talk about geese. It doesn't talk about migratory birds that don't need guidance. It talks about something that needs a lot of guidance. It talks about sheep. When we think about sheep, I want to tell you, I don't know an incredible amount about sheep. Some of you all have raised sheep and you know more about them than I do. I know that when they're young, they're cute and they're fluffy. When they get older, they look pretty gross until you see somebody just completely take all of their fur off and then they just look weird. But there's one thing I know about sheep. And that is sheep are not nearly as smart as many of the other animals that we see in the created kingdom, in the animal kingdom. They don't share the great intelligence of some of the more crafty and wise creatures that God created. In fact, I think we could probably just say sheep are kind of dumb. Why do we say that? Because they experience that, and they show that through their lives. In fact, if you take just a moment to see this, when sheep get themselves in situations like this, I don't know why that's not playing. That kind of ruins the whole illustration. That sheep is going to be pulled out of that hole, and he's going to run down, and he's going to jump right back in that hole and get stuck all over again. That is what we do when and we need to recognize something. In Psalm 23, that's what we are being called. We are being called sheep. Sheep are not very intelligent. Sheep get themselves in trouble. Sheep need shepherds. And Psalm 23 is reminding us we have one. We have a great shepherd who leads us, who is guiding us, and we need to see our need for that. We need to see ourselves for what we are, not the ones that have this built-in system that says, I know the path, I know the way to go. There's the one that says, I need a shepherd that's leading me. I need a shepherd to guide me. I need someone to show me the path to greener pastures, to life. As we continue on in the song, we get to verse 2, and we hear these words. Sometimes mid scenes of deepest gloom, sometimes where Eden's bowers bloom, by waters still or troubled sea, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. Next thing that this song reminds us of is not only do we need God's leadership, but we must be seeking it at all times. I think it's very easy for us to see our need for God and for His leadership and His guidance, and even to be praying and seeking that out when things get really, really bad. When the country is in turmoil, when the risk of war is high, when our bills are piling up, when our health is failing us, when things aren't going the way we want to seek God in difficult times. And the Bible tells us that's an important thing for us to do. In James chapter 1, James tells us, be joyful in trial. And there's a reason for that there's a reason James can say that trials, difficult times can bring joy to us. It says, consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. It says, recognize that trials can do something. Seeking God's leadership and His guidance in difficult days can lead to something important and something powerful working out in your life. And that is the idea of endurance. Of seeing that I've been brought through by the leadership of God difficult days, and so the next set of difficult days comes along, God can get me through that too. But verse 5 is powerfully important in that because he talks about wisdom. We think of wisdom sometimes as just as intelligence or as smarts or know-how, but it's more than that. It's also the idea of knowing how things are going to turn out, knowing what's going to be the ramifications of my actions, knowing where this is going to lead me. And he says in verse 5, if any of you lack that, if you lack wisdom, let him ask of God who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. If you don't have the ability to see in difficult times where God is leading you, pray for wisdom to see that God can do something in this to complete you, to mature you, to grow you, that you might be stronger. And so we need to spend time seeking God in prayer during difficult times. Psalm 119, 105, one of the verses that I'll take that off. Psalm 119, 105, one of the verses we're focusing the last 2 months on. Your word is a light to my path. Not only do we spend time seeking God's guidance in prayer, but we dig into His word that offers us guidance, that is going to lead us even in dark and troublesome times. We need to seek God when times are difficult. But did you notice the song pointed out, whether by calm water or troubled sea? It doesn't matter if it's a difficult day. It doesn't matter if the world has heaped itself up against us or if it is a day filled with peace. And the sun is shining, the waters are smooth. We need to seek God. We need God's guidance in those times, maybe even more than we need it in difficult times. We need the resolve to seek God's guidance, His leadership. What happened to the children of Israel after the generation that knew war, the generation that knew the pain and the trouble of conquest, that came in and they fought terrible battles to cast out the inhabitants of Canaan, to preserve that inheritance for themselves. As God led them and God gave them victory, they leaned upon His guidance over and over again, but then they had the land and they didn't have the war anymore. They had cisterns that they did not hew out. They had olive groves that they did not plant. They had the riches that came from that conquest and no longer had the battle that went along with it. And what happened? When they walked by still waters, they quit leaning upon God's guidance and they started leaning upon themselves. The strength that they have, the power that they have, the wisdom that they have. And it led them further and further away from God and deeper into sin. At times of rest and joy and peace, just like times of great turmoil, we need the Lord in those moments. In fact, there is never a time in which we don't need God. He wants our trust. He wants our hands outstretched to His so that He can lead us from the first moment to the last. Let's look at the last verse together. And when my task on earth is done, when by God's grace the victory's won, in death's cold wave I will not flee, since God through Jordan leadeth me. This final verse, interestingly enough, is not the final verse. He wrote 4 verses to this song. We only sing 3 of them. I didn't know that until I got ready to do this lesson. There's a 4th verse that's actually a 3rd verse that's really pretty. But in this final verse that we'll look at, we learn something. God is leading us somewhere. He's leading us to heaven. There's a time that is coming when our time draws near. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 tells us that for all men it is appointed once to die and then the judgment. We have an appointment to keep. We have a moment that is going to come in our lives, every one of us, that is going to face an end to this temporal life and the beginning of something far more eternal. The 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, a passage that we'll look at more in depth as we continue through the Thessalonian letter, reminds us that even if we happen to not live until to the moment where we pass away, there is a moment that is coming when Christ will return. And when He comes to return, He is going to gather those who have been in the grave and those who remain alive, and we will be carried up together, and we will face judgment before the God of all creation. When that moment arrives, whether it be the end of our life or the coming of Christ, when that moment arrives, how do we stand? Do we stand in confidence before our shepherd who has gathered his sheep to come home? Or will we feel the opposite of what verse 3 talks about? Having this fear at the face of death. I know something. I know something because God guides us to know this. I know that we can have victory. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, a fantastic chapter to read and study. And next quarter, I'm confident, and Michael's going to do a fantastic job teaching that, and so I don't have to dig into it. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul uses these words, if the resurrection didn't happen, we are, of all men, most pitied. We have no hope. We have bought into a foolish lie. And yet Paul follows that up, stating the resurrection did happen. And because Jesus was resurrected from the dead, we too can have victory over death. It says, death, where is your sting? Where is your victory? It has been taken from Him by Jesus Christ. Satan has no victory in this life. Death has no victory over us. Sin can have no victory over us in Christ Jesus. And that is evidenced and it is stamped with God's stamp of approval by the most fantastic event that has ever happened in the history of mankind, when Jesus Christ, crucified on the cross, buried for 3 days, arose. We have victory over death. But in 1 John chapter 5, in verse 4, we know we have victory over sin. 1 John chapter 5, verse 4 says, for whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Victory that leads to life everlasting. When we sing this song, He leadeth me, we are singing a song that reminds us that not only do we need God's leadership, not only do we need to be seeking it at all times, we need to understand that He's leading us to a special place, a place where we will sit in His presence, and He will be our light. And the things that assault, the things that hurt, the things that are abominable, lying and deception and things that attack and hurt, all of these things, He says, are not there. For it is just Him and Jesus and the Spirit for eternity with His people. As we sing this song, I ask you the question, do you want to go? Because that's what I think about. When I sing this song, He leadeth me, I think about wanting so very bad to go where God is leading me. and wanting you to go with me. As we sing this song, I hope that you will think about who is leading you in your life. Is it man? Is there somebody in your life that is dictating the decisions that you make? That is telling you this is more important, this is what you need to think, this is how you need to act? We have seen time and time again through scriptures in the life of man that we are not good judges. We are not great leaders. But inevitably, if it's man, if it's not God, it's Satan. Satan is not leading us to a place where we will find comfort and peace and joy, but rather leading us further and further into death. The good news of the gospel is that the shepherd came. In John chapter 10, Jesus used these words, "Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes in only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Jesus Christ gave his life to lead us to where God is. If we can help you this evening in coming to him, beginning that journey on a path with God leading you to heaven, it would be our great desire to do so. If you have begun that journey and have strayed off that path, like sheep, going astray, remember that Jesus is the good shepherd that seeks those who are lost. If we can help you to return to him, we desire to do that as well. Whatever we can do to assist you, let's talk about it together as we stand and sing.